November 11, 1918. World War I and the Bolshevik Revolution ended. People were celebrating, drinking, and dancing on the streets, praising the signed armistice between the Allies and Germany. As soon as the armistice was signed, the damages and cost of the war took their toll. Unemployment rates immediately surged, as 4 million American soldiers returned home. In 1919, there were strikes, involving many of whom were soldiers returning from war. After World War I ended, inflation made the cost of living 99% higher than what it was in 1914. The stage was set for revolution, as tensions grew within America.
November 1918 comes, the armistice kicks in, and these orders for war materials are canceled. The industrialists say, well, we don't need a lot of these workers anymore, lay them off. The workers that we are going to keep, well, we sure don't need to pay them what we were paying them before. So in a sense, what you've got happening as the war ends is a struggle between workers and management.
The 1917 revolution in Russia, led by Bolshevists Vladimir Lenin and Leon Trotsky, spread ideas that began to poison the minds of American workers. Workers and labor unions believed they could overthrow capitalism to gain management over their own working conditions. On February 6, 1919, 60,000 workers in the Seattle area went on strike, with support from the Central Labor Council. The Seattle strike instantly was the headline of every newspaper across the country, and the strikers were labeled as Reds, who were attempting to establish communism in America. And after 5 days of constant striking, the mayor of Seattle, Ol Hansen, reacted. Referring to the need to ensure the safety of Seattle, Hansen sent 3,000 policemen and federal troops to break the strike. By February 10, the strike was called to an end. The Seattle strike marked the inception of a series of violent revolutionary strikes in America. On May 1st, 1919, Cleveland, Ohio, socialist Charles Ruthenberg gathered unionists, communists, socialists, and anarchists to parade against the jailing of Eugene Debs. Debs was a radical socialist who believed capitalism should be replaced by a new economical system. In the parade, the strikers marched to Public Square, but they were stopped by a patriotic organization, the Victory Loan Workers. When the Reds refused to lower their red flags, rioting commenced, and the violence was stopped only by the use of mounted police, army trucks, and tanks. On September 9, 1919, Boston, Massachusetts, the Boston police force went on strike. The striking officers caused disorder. A mob of strikers was fired upon by federal troops using machine guns and killed many. On September 22nd, 275,000 steel workers nationwide withdrew from their jobs. By January 1920, due to the declaration of martial law, more than 2/3 of the steel workers resumed working. With relentless strikes and riots invading the streets of cities all over America, hysteria and fear plunged deep into the hearts of Americans. Houses were often locked, stores were forced to close early, and restaurants were filled with hungry strikers. The fear of a communist revolution was palpable. On April 28, anarchist ambitions were shown. 36 bombs were sent through the mail to anti-anarchist officials and valuable company owners such as oil industrialist John D. Rockefeller and Commissioner General of Immigration Anthony Caminetti. The first bomb was discovered with intentions of killing Mayor Hansen, who was a target for ending the Seattle strike. From then on, all mail was checked before mailing it to the recipient. Without delay, President Woodrow Wilson reacts by using the Espionage Act of 1917 and Sedition Act of 1918. The reforms made labor disputes and disloyalty to America a crime. It also allowed the deportation of innocent, undesirable immigrants. President Woodrow Wilson also appointed General A. Mitchell Palmer, and Assistant J. Edgar Hoover, to use the acts to fine, to incarcerate, or deport radical organizations or individuals with Bolshevik conspiracies. On June 2, 1919, after given the job to hunt down Reds, an Italian anarchist bombed Palmer's house, injuring and killing Palmer's wife and kids. Henceforth, the Palmer raids commenced.
Whenever they talk about the Palmer raids among historians, they're viewed as one of the very darkest moments in American history. And they truly are. Thousands of people were arrested, most of whom had absolutely nothing to do with radicalism.
It was through the Palmer raids that the FBI had built an astonishing reputation in America by driving out all undesirable immigrants. The raids had arrested 10,000 suspected communists and anarchists without trial.
The issue with the Palmer raids, in many cases, they were not legitimate warrants, or they had no warrants at all. That's why people look at these raids and say, this was over the top, this was out of bounds. They didn't even bother with a warrant in many cases. They did in some, but certainly not in all. That was one of the big problems that people had with what was going on.
A majority of the immigrants were eventually released. 247 immigrants, including anarchist advocator Emma Goldman, were kept and deported in the Soviet Ark back to Russia. Even though Emma Goldman was a Russian anarchist, she was an American. Emma, along with many others, took the freedom of speech to preach their beliefs, but instead were stripped of their civil liberties. When embarking the Soviet Ark, Emma said, "One does not live in a country 34 years and find it easy to go. All I know, I have gained here." As more arrests and deportations were made, communist and anarchist activity ceased, but this made Palmer suspicious of a May Day conspiracy.
He has evidence of a massive attempt to overthrow the government on May Day in 1920. There's going to be bombings, there's going to be assaults on buildings, there's going to be people trying to take over the Capitol. May Day comes and goes. I'm sorry, it's just May Day. And everybody goes, "Mr. Palmer, what is this all about?"
Palmer's job as a Red Hunter was discharged as May Day passed along with the Red Scare in the summer of 1920. The Red Scare in 1919 showed that under high stress, the American government tends to bend laws in order to reinforce them. In times of high tension, Americans not only showed fear in the Red Scare, but also how Americanism had been entrenched within them. The Red Scare of 1919 was a series of strikes and revolutionary reactions in an attempt to overthrow capitalism, but they subsided due to legislation of the American government.